Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ascending High Priestess. I hope you guys are doing well. For those of you who are new, welcome, welcome, welcome. And I actually started sort of like we are going to be talking about different topics. So I color coordinate everything. The purple ones are tarot, the blue ones are Reiki, and this wonderful, vibrant orange and yellow. This is going to be us just conversing and going over different topics that I know that from time to time people in our general community like to talk about. So I hope that you guys enjoy this and let's get started. So, we are in our first episode, I guess you could say, of Real Talk and Wild Cards. So, I wanted to focus on the generational curse breaker. What is the generational curse breaker? For a lot of us, we have been that person. We have been the one to sort of pick up that mantle and, that family member that has to go through many, many, many different things, hardships to kind of get to the other side. And for a lot of us, we're like, why? Did I sign up for this? Why was I chosen for this? And it's been a difficult road. I know for myself it's been a difficult road. So I know for a lot of people that go through a spiritual journey, and for those of you who are not spiritual but still are listening to this, you may find something in here. You may define yourself as the black sheep of the family. And why is that? You're the one that has had to put strong boundaries. You're the one that, speaks up and speaks up loudly. You're the one that it's going to say, you know what, this ends with me. And, through all that dysfunction, trauma, hardship, and, we see the patterns. We have seen the patterns. Personally, for me, I have seen patterns within my own family that, I didn't want to pass on, that I didn't want to entertain, that I wanted to definitely break. And I'm sure that you all could relate to that. For some of us, we may have had really tough childhoods. We may have seen violence. We may have seen parents that were just very cold or distant. We may have seen sort of patterns of, toxic relationships, patterns where, maybe the women in our family just didn't stand up for themselves, or the men in our family being brutes, okay? These are kind of like the toxic patterns that a lot of us are fighting against or were fighting against, and, came through to the other side or are still going through. For a lot of that, you know, generational pattern breaker, it wasn't easy, and there was a lot of work, a lot of emotional baggage that we had to put down, a lot of emotional I'm hearing therapy from one of my guides, emotional therapy that we may have gone to. But for a lot of us, even those of us who have not gone to therapy, and trust me when I say there is nothing wrong with therapy. I am in the healthcare field, and I always champion people who absolutely want to take that step and go to someone who is professional and wants to, see a different perspective with someone that is non-judgmental. So if that's the road that you are thinking of going or want to explore, please, do so. But there are a lot of people who somehow or other they come to the conclusion that that also may not be the best thing for them. So you have to find your own way, okay? And you have to find that support system. And unfortunately, sometimes we do not have that support system. We are alone. We are our own champion. We are our own system, a system of one, okay? But for a lot of people, the heavy emotional work, started as a child. It started out as recognizing, or at least, even if it's not a full recognition, just seeing certain things and saying, you know what, I don't want to be that person, or I don't want to end up like my dad or my mom, or I don't want to, be so cold in relationships like my grandmother, or I don't want to, come home and always be in a bad mood and drink like my grandfather. Those are conscious decisions that we make. And as generational curse breakers, we we internalize and start working little by little to change that pattern. And when we say I don't want to be like this, I don't, that is the message that we're sending to the universe, that hey, you know what, this has to somehow change, and I am the one to change it. And it could be a very deeply rewarding path, but it could be a path that is extremely isolating. It could be extremely lonely, because to be chosen as the family curse breaker, or as the generational, you know, uh, sort of like the patron saint of, let's do this, um, it can be lonely, it can be tiring, and it can leave you with a lot of more questions than answers. There are times where you may feel, it's a very demanding task. You may feel like you're being bullied by um, ancestors, that you haven't even met. And sometimes, leaving a legacy of positivity can mean that you're putting a lot of your happiness aside. And if you were to look at um, this through a psychological lens, breaking behavior loops, they're not easy, because as we all know, we all have our quirks, we all have our challenges, we all have our, just different things that make us who we are. And each family, each person is different. And sometimes breaking these traditions, you know, can mean that you're, going against the grain will put you on the other side of that fence without support from the family that you have. And that could be very isolating, because if, let's say, if your family is extremely religious, let's suppose, and now you are going against that religion because you have seen that it has become a little bit too toxic, or it just doesn't resonate. It could leave you in a place where, you're not invited to certain things. You may be talked about, you may be pushed aside. um, you know so it's extremely difficult, and we've all had, I'm sure, some challenges that we, could talk about. But, this involves choices and responsibility, and, going through different experiences and learning from those patterns, and making changes. Sometimes changes are made abruptly, when like that tower comes down, and, you're being forced to sort of make that hard right instead of a left. And, you have to kind of start from scratch and set that foundation, so that way moving forward you have a stronger base. Other times, these experiences may be a little bit more subtle, and where you could actually take a breath and and slowly figure stuff out for yourself, okay? And we've all been there. For a lot of us, being the black sheep means disconnecting sometimes from the norm, from the familiar thought patterns that we are used to. So now we have to incorporate certain behaviors and certain things in our new life. And that may mean new traditions, it may mean new friends, it may mean a different way of dressing, it may mean moving out of our immediate surroundings at times, because sometimes the toxicity is within our very own community and environment. So, in order for us to thrive and succeed and being ourselves and being able to bring in that positivity into our own lives and that light, we sometimes need to leave the darkness behind. And by doing that, that would mean that we have to sort of be strong and face isolation, um, trying to decipher emotional manipulation from family and friends. We may also have to say no to behaviors that, you know, may be hurtful and demeaning towards us. And it may mean a lot of times where you are walking alone and you are sort of trying to pick up the pieces of who you're going to be and sort of peacefully and gently put down the person that you were. And it's a big pressure, it's a big, heavy feeling to leave the past behind and to endure the emotional pain of, can I do this? Can I really, really do this? Do I see myself, you know, going to a new place, learning how to be this other person, without the support of family and friends? And a lot of times, many of us, we have the challenge that, you know, when we do this, we are walking through this minefield of emotional storms, alone for it could be weeks, months, and many, many years, you know. But with that comes a sense of freedom, where you are able to choose. And there's freedom in that choice. There's strength, there's knowledge, there is some love for yourself, where you are able to, find the freedom in learning the dysfunction, learning about the addiction, learning about the toxicity and the choices, and it will lead you to, growth, emotional growth, spiritual growth, mental growth, okay? And you will be so much stronger for it. A lot of times, as people, or because obviously that we are spiritual beings having a earthly experience, a human experience, we have a hard time naming that that hurt and naming that toxicity. I think putting a name or a label on it, it's very important, because then you can identify the monster. Okay, you can identify the monster of greed, lust, selfishness, um, lack of emotion, lack of, respect. And you're able to sort of put it in a nice, neat little box in the past if you're able to recognize it and then recognize it in other people. So that way, when you're faced with it again, you're able to say, you know what, this is so not for me, and walk away quickly, and not entertain people who come with the same energy, or, expect you to sort of entertain their demons when, they're treating you a certain way. And you also have to also provide the love that you didn't receive, which is very important. You have to sort of reparent that child that didn't get, all those lessons, all those moments of love and respect and joy, all those moments where, you felt small, or you felt pushed aside and ignored. You need to reparent that kid and say, you know what, you are worth it. You are, worth me loving. You are worth my attention and my embrace and my all. Okay. And for those of us who may not have a sort of a best friend or a group of friends, you need to internalize all of this and turn it into something positive, and not only reparent, but become your own cheerleader and best friend. And it can be done. It may sound like this huge unattainable task, but it can be done, and people have done it. And for those of you who are struggling with taking that first step, just taking that first step and saying, you know what, I'm not putting up with the bullshit. I'm not putting up with people disrespecting me. I am not putting up with liars. I am not putting up with someone who feels that they could push my boundaries. I'm not putting up with someone who feels that they're going to cheat, they're going to steal, they're going to, emotionally badger me. That is something that, once you put those boundaries and once you stand firmly, people tend to back off. People tend to look at you a little bit different. People tend to realize that there is a real wall that they can't push back, and then you are pushing against that very firmly. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be mean, you don't have to be cruel about it, you just have to be firm. And a lot of times, choosing to do this um, can be a little bit unnerving at first, because you've never done this. Healing comes with it, like I said. And curiosity is something that a lot of us have sort of, again, picked up on, because we began, for a lot of us, this curiosity of, what if mom and dad did things differently? What if grandpa did things differently? So that, just that childhood curiosity of the what ifs, sometimes lead us to challenge our surroundings and challenge our behavior, or other people's behavior. And again, a lot of times, because you speak up and you speak up loudly, it may put you in a place where, you know, um, you may feel sort of like the emotional punching bag of the family, because you're not thinking like the other people in the household. So symbolically, you don't want to inherit patterns or traumas, or weird beliefs, and you want to make sure that you're not taking that down. You're not taking that down the road. And, the ancestors must have thought you were a badass to assign you this. And for a lot of people, that say, why me? Yes, I was curious and I questioned and I pushed back. And, maybe my energy was different, and maybe I believed I could, be the breaker, the one that could choose this divine path, but it's become very, very tough. At some point in your life, before you came into this wonderful 3D world, this was part of your assignment. This was something that you did choose. This was something that you were like, you know what, maybe I could do this. Let me try to do this. Let me go out there and see what I can do. So for a lot of us that, and you get to a point in your spiritual path where you realize that why you were chosen for certain things, why it had to be you, why you had to go through so many different hardships. And it was because a lot of times you were not only strong enough and strong willed, you are the one that's going to be the teacher. You're the one that's going to teach the other generation or other people or even other friends how to walk away from certain things, walk away from certain hurts, how to be able to be that shoulder to, that people come for comfort. And you learn very early how to carry on that weight. Um, and a lot of times, you fear repeating certain patterns. And as we all know, we're human. It takes a while for some of us. It takes a while to learn some certain lessons. And just because you may repeat a pattern, once, twice, sometimes 3 times, 20 times, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that you are trying and you're learning from experience, okay? So it may take some of us, a while to sort of get it, okay? Again, we are living in the 3D. There are times where certain tasks and certain things may feel like punishment. Um, but we are learning. And maybe, let's say the first time we go through a relationship, we learn about betrayal. The second time, we learn how to stand up for ourselves. The third time, we may learn that to walk away from something that doesn't serve us a lot quicker. The fourth time or the fifth time or the sixth time, you know, so forth and so on. We learn different things, and that's what it's all about. It's about learning. Um, and how does this play, with generational inheritance? So, for, many centuries and generations before us, our ancestors were doing the same thing. Maybe they were going through the same hardships, but let's just say, for instance, and we'll talk about my own family, for instance, and the female side of my family. They had a very hard time with the men they chose. Okay, the men they chose tended to be very narcissistic, very cold, very emotionally abusive. And this was a pattern. When I tell you that I have sat down and researched and looked and did more research, I have seen this pattern play out for many, many, many generations, okay? And unfortunately, the females in my family, yes, they are strong women. And I'm not taking this away from them because they are. They're very, very strong women, very strong willed women. But these women were all in survival mode, okay? They had to go through a lot of things because they were not able to walk away when they needed to, or they were not able to see that light in themselves and to love themselves a little bit more to be able to make that choice. A lot of them, because of financial circumstances, they chose to stay. For a lot of them, it was a self esteem issue. And for some of them, it was um, an issue of what will, people say? What will people think if I made that choice to leave? So a lot of the that generational baggage sort of gets dumped into the new generation, and you pick up on toxic patterns very quickly. And again, it's up to you to say, nope, I'm not going to do it. I am not going to do it. I'm not going to choose a partner like this. I am definitely not going to let a partner treat me like that. I am definitely going to be able to, walk away when I need to. And the trick is to see it and do it. But again, it's a lot harder when you're faced with that reality, what you're going to do. I found myself in situations that were very similar to my female, the matriarchal line of my family. But I also found myself a lot stronger in situations where I was able to clearly put my foot down and end something very quickly. Um, not without any bumps and scrapes, and not I also had to learn my own hard lessons in order to make sure that I came out a lot stronger for it. Okay. Did I see that initially? No. It takes years to kind of see that sometimes. It takes, you going down that spiritual path a little bit longer to see certain patterns and to recognize them. Again, recognition is it's key. Recognition and walking that path and placing yourself in situations where you could clearly see what it was. In 2020, what is that saying? 2020 is hindsight, something like that. Sometimes you don't realize what a gift a certain experience is until you come out of it, and as difficult as some experiences have been, they were gifts because I was able to learn from them and see them and recognize that, hey, hey, I've suffered, I've went through it, I've managed to scrape my knees, bump my head, and keep on keep it. I kept it moving. I kept walking, and I think a lot of you are able to do the same thing, and with some inner strength, find that joy within yourself, find that love within yourself, and you'll be able to break your own generational curses and break your own, toxic patterns. Again, not easy, but you are a complete badass and you could do this. So I hope you enjoyed this first Real Talk Wild Cards. Um, it's a safe space for everyone. And, just come back, hit like and share and subscribe. And I will see you soon. Take care.